Which means that if humans can control the leader,
a technology that would transform the world. Ironically, the region had a fundamental weakness. Despite having some nutritious crops on them. By contrast, places like New Guinea never developed advanced technology. Even today, some people in the highlands are working in ways that have barely changed. Within 1,000 years of their emergence, most of the new villages of the Fertile Crescent were abandoned. Ironically, by contrast, places like New Guinea never developed advanced technology. Even today, some people in the highlands are working in ways that have barely changed for centuries.
When I first came to New Guinea in the 1960s, people were still using stone tools like this axe in parts of the island. And before European arrival, people were using stone tools everywhere in New Guinea. So why didn't New Guinea develop metal tools by itself? And eventually I realized that to have metalworking specialists who can figure out how to smelt copper and iron requires that the rest of the people in the society who are farmers be able to generate enough food surpluses to feed them. But New Guinea agriculture was not productive enough to generate those food surpluses. And the result was no specialists, no metal workers, no metal tools.
The way of life in New Guinea was perfectly viable. It had survived intact for thousands of years. But according to Diamond, people didn't advance technologically because they spent too much time and energy feeding themselves. And then Westerners arrived and used their technology to colonize the country. By contrast, places like New Guinea
When I first came to New Guinea in the 1960s, people were still using stone tools like this axe in parts of the island. And before European arrival, people were using stone tools everywhere in New Guinea. So why didn't New Guinea develop metal tools by itself? And eventually I realized that to have metalworking specialists who can figure out how to smelt copper and iron requires that the rest of the people in the society who are farmers be able to generate enough food surpluses to feed them.
Dr. Eve.
Hi.
No.
So my other college, I was always. Really? Yeah.
Oh.
Excuse me.
I mean, no.
Okay, want to remind each one that today is when I would like to have your person, if you haven't yet sent it to me, for your oral report. So please fill out the question there on that test there in Populi and let me have it so that I can then make the schedule ready for your reports. Obviously, the reports are not due today because you may not even know at this point, well, I hope this is not the case, but you may not know at this point who you're reporting on. But you will be reporting on the person you select on or around the date that the chapter is due later on in the semester, but be looking in the calendar for this course for a notice to show up that will let you know when you need to be ready, especially if there's more than one person reporting on any particular chapter, then you probably won't both be scheduled the same day, and one of you won't be doing this on the on that day, maybe before or after. So anyway, just keep that in mind and be prepared. I'm going to be putting together the study guide for your first test. There are no reports before the first test, but after that, then you'll need to be ready. And so I would encourage each of you to start working on your report as soon as possible so that you're ready. The expectation is that you will have a report that's well organized, that tells the life and contribution of the person that you're studying with a corresponding PowerPoint. And between now and then, I'm going to be looking at exactly how that works for the people who are working remotely. I believe that we can set it up so that their report will be on this screen. Whether or not it's on this screen is another issue. But I should be able to set it up so that the report is on this screen right here. And that we'll be able to see them, and then they'll be able to talk to us about what they're presenting. So keep that in mind as we proceed. Okay, so that's going to be our thing for that's the assignment for today, and continue working on your terms and getting those done. The terms for the first unit are expected to be done before the first test. After that, we'll move on to unit 2. So if you don't get the first unit terms done, don't bother. Start working on the terms that will help you with the second test and so on. And we'll move on that way. Okay, so let's have prayer and then we'll begin. Father, we thank you. We thank you that you are working in our lives and are helping us to understand history. We pray for your continued blessing here, and that you will guide us and direct us in everything that we do and say. I pray that you will continue to be with Dr. Spies in his recovery now that he is home, and the future leadership of the college, and for your wisdom there. And I pray that you will have your hand in this class and help us as we study and learn together. In Jesus' name we pray, amen. I haven't really checked, but I think most of you have turned in a person. But for those who haven't, get it done today. So, okay. We're going to finish up the video clip that we were showing that deals with the Fertile Crescent and the development of agriculture, farming, livestock herding, and then technological advance. There's 2 other things that we need to deal with also, and it is presented here, that would ask the question of the transformation of society. It's not just farming and the availability of various crops, and then animals that are domesticated that seems to give people in the Middle East, and then for a lesser degree, Europe and North Africa, an advantage. But there's also the idea of the creation of specialization in the society that is helped by that. And then you have the acquisition of disease. So diseases like measles, smallpox, and other animal-based diseases, influenza, are acquired by humans. And those humans who survive the pandemic, when we let it run its course, have an advantage over an area in the world where that particular pathogen is not known to exist. And so often when Europeans would travel to other parts of the world, their very presence there, and of course they're bringing with them their animals, horses, pigs, and so forth. And this will create a situation where the native populations will die of disease significantly. Sometimes even because the Europeans would sail past on a boat, never even make it to shore, and sort of like a cloud of disease just follows the boat, killing people as it sails by. This is definitely true about American Indians. In the years before the coming of, let's say, the Pilgrims and places like that, Indians were devastated simply because of explorers sailing by without even coming ashore. And then when the Europeans do come ashore, there are large sections of formerly inhabited land that's vacant of people for the taking. And so this is another issue that helps with the process. So there's no big conspiracy about Western domination of the world. It just seems to be the way it is. And there's another interesting thing. Why didn't Europeans conquer sub-Saharan Africa in the same way they did places like South Africa, Europe, North and South America, and displace the native populations? They may have conquered places like Kenya or places like that, but the local population isn't decimated. And it has to do with the fact that Africa, you traveled north and south, and they'll explain this in this video, and that created a situation where the diseases and animals that were in, especially things like malaria, yellow fever, such, that became common in those parts of the world, it worked in reverse. For some reason, the Europeans were dying. They could not make crops, and surrounded by Africans who were healthy and happy and productive. And the disease issues worked in reverse there. And so the tropical areas remained impervious. So it's interesting how just geography and such help define how the world is organized. So this is basically where we left off. And so I will start it from there, and then we'll watch this to the end of this presentation.
By 9,000 years ago, the first settlements in the Middle East were giving way to much larger villages. People were only able to live on this scale by becoming more productive farmers. They were surrounded by fields of domesticated wheat and barley. But by now, they also had another steady source of food.
What we see happening about 9,000 years ago is a remarkable transformation in the way that humans are interacting with animals. We begin to see a process of animal domestication, by which we mean humans were controlling where they were moving, they were controlling their feeding, and they were controlling their breeding. Instead of having to go out to hunt, you have a dependable meat supply on the hoof year-round around your site, rather than being subject to seasonal variations in wild game.
As well as meat, animals could be used for their milk, providing an ongoing source of protein. Their hair and skins could be used to make clothes for extra warmth. Over time, domestic animals became an integral part of the new agricultural way of life.
We know that the communities which first started to have domestic animals already had cereal crops, so they were cultivators. And the combination of these particular animals and the plants becomes an extremely attractive package in that they're complementary. After the harvest period, animals could be turned out on the stubble and they can actually eat the remains of the cereal crop harvest. In their turn, animal dung can be used to provide sort of a fertilizer for the cereal crops as well, So the whole package, is seen to be mutually beneficial, both for the animals and the plants, and of course for the humans.
Goats and sheep were the first animals to be domesticated in the ancient world, and were eventually followed by the other big farm animals of today. All of them were used at first for their meat, but they all proved useful in other ways, especially with the invention of the plow. Before the Industrial Revolution, beasts of burden were the most powerful machines on the planet. A horse or an ox harnessed to a plow could transform the productivity of the land, allowing farmers to grow more food and feed more people. In New Guinea and many other parts of the world, people never used plows because they never had the animals to pull them.
The only big domestic animal in New Guinea was the pig, and it wasn't even native. It came in from Asia a few thousand years ago. While Europe and Asia had not only pigs, but also cows, sheep, goats, horses, buffalo, camels, and so on. Now, pigs do give you meat, but pigs don't give you the other products that you get from those European nation animals. Pigs don't give you milk, or wool, or leather, or hides. Most important of all, pigs can't be used for muscle power. Pigs don't pull plows or pull cars. The only muscle power in New Guinea was human muscle power.
Even today, there are no beasts of burden in New Guinea, and almost all of the farm work is still done by hand. But if farm animals were so useful, why didn't New Guineans domesticate any of their own? I decided to add up all the animals in the world that have ever been domesticated, and I was amazed by what I found.
There are nearly 2 million known species of wild animals, but the vast majority have never been farmed. Most insects and rodents are of no practical use to humans and not worth the effort of farming. Some birds, fish, and reptiles have been domesticated, but most are simply impractical to farm. So are most carnivores, not because they're dangerous, but because you'd have to grow other animals just to feed them. The best animals to farm are large plant-eating mammals. And over the years, humans have probably tried to domesticate all of them, usually without success. Despite repeated efforts, Africans have never domesticated the elephant. In South Asia, some elephants are used as work animals, but they're not farmed for the purpose. Instead, each elephant is caught in the wild and then tamed and trained. It doesn't make economic sense to farm an animal that takes some 15 years to mature and reach an age where it can start reproducing.
Animals which make suitable candidates for domestication can start giving birth in their first or second years. They will have 1 or maybe 2 offspring a year, so their productivity is actually high. Behaviorally, they need to be social animals, meaning that the males and the females and the young all live together as a group, and they also have an internal social hierarchy, which means that if humans can control the leader, then they will also gain control over a whole herd or a whole flock.
There's another crucial requirement for a domestic animal. It needs to get along with humans. Some animals don't have the temperament to live on a farm. A zebra could be an ideal domestic animal, potentially as useful as a horse. But evolving in the midst of Africa's great predators, zebras have become flighty, nervous creatures. vicious streak that humans have been unable to tame. That may be why zebras have never been harnessed to a plow or ridden into battle.
I counted up 148 different species of wild, plant-eating, terrestrial mammals that weigh over 100 pounds. But of those 148, the number that have ever been successfully farmed for any length of time is just 14. Goats, sheep, pigs, cows, horses, donkeys, Bactrian camels, Arabian camels, water buffalo, llamas, reindeer, yaks, nithans, and Bowie cattle. Just 14 large domestic animals in 10,000 years of domestication. And where did the ancestors of these animals come from? None was from New Guinea, or Australia, or sub-Saharan Africa, or the whole continent of North America. South America had the ancestor of just one large domestic animal, the llama. The other 13 were all from Asia, North Africa, and Europe. And of these, the big four livestock animals, cows, pigs, sheep, and goats, were native to the Middle East. The very same area that was home to some of the best crops in the world was also home to some of the best animals. Little wonder that this area became known as the Fertile Crescent.
The people of the Fertile Crescent were geographically blessed, with access to some of the best crops and farm animals in the ancient world. It gave them a huge head start. What had begun with the sowing of wheat and the penning of goats was leading towards the first human civilization. The archaeological site of Guer in southern Jordan is 9,000 years old, but it has all the hallmarks of a town. A few hundred people lived here in rows of houses that were a wonder of technology.
Every time I come here, I'm amazed by what those people were doing. Some of the houses have a kind of air conditioning. This window here is to control the air coming from the street inside the house. And the houses, the walls and the floors of the houses from the inside at least were covered with plaster. So people were moving to the concept of homes. It's not a place just to sleep, it is a proper home, and people started to decorate the houses from the inside. And people were started to invest in their homes, because if we are talking about plaster, it is time consuming, it's effort consuming, it's very expensive to have plaster in the house.
As villages grew bigger, there were more people to work on the land. More people could produce more food more efficiently, enough to support specialists within the community. Freed from the burden of farming, some people were able to develop new skills and new technologies. Making plaster from limestone was a major technological breakthrough. The stones had to be heated for days at a time, at a temperature of 1,000 degrees. It may seem insignificant today, but understanding how to work with fire was the first step towards forging steel, a technology that would transform the world. By contrast, places like New Guinea never developed advanced technology. Even today, some people in the highlands are working in ways that have barely changed for centuries.
When I first came to New Guinea in the 1960s, people were still using stone tools like this axe in parts of the island. And before European arrival, people were using stone tools everywhere in New Guinea. So why didn't New Guinea develop metal tools by itself? And eventually I realized that to have metalworking specialists who can figure out how to smelt copper and iron requires that the rest of the people in the society who are farmers be able to generate enough food surpluses to feed them. But New Guinea agriculture was not productive enough to generate those food surpluses. And the result was no specialists, no metal workers, no metal tools.
The way of life in New Guinea was perfectly viable. It had survived intact for thousands of years. But according to Diamond, people didn't advance technologically because they spent too much time and energy feeding themselves. And then Westerners arrived and used their technology to colonize the country. Yet for all its advantages, the Fertile Crescent is not the powerhouse of the modern world, nor is it the breadbasket it once was. How did it lose its head start? Within 1,000 years of their emergence, most of the new villages of the Fertile Crescent were abandoned. Ironically, the region had a fundamental weakness. Despite having some of the most nutritious crops on the planet, its climate was too dry and its ecology too fragile to support continuous intensive farming.
People were destroying the environment. The waters had been overexploited, the trees had been cut, and this is what, when you face a dead end, I mean, you are facing the wall. You will end with landscape like that, I mean, with few trees, with no grass, and with less water. So what we are looking at today is the outcome of overexploiting the environment.
Unable to farm their land, entire communities were forced to move on. The advantages they'd accrued from centuries of domestication might have been lost. But again, geography was on their side.
The Fertile Crescent is in the middle of a huge landmass, Eurasia. There were plenty of places for farming to spread, and crucially, many of those places were to the east and west of the Fertile Crescent at roughly the same line of latitude. Why is that so important? Because any 2 points of the globe that share the same latitude automatically share the same length of day, and they often share a similar climate and vegetation. Crops or animals domesticated in the Fertile Crescent were able to prosper at other places along the east-west axis like Eurasia. Wheat and barley, sheep and goats, cows and pigs all spread from the Fertile Crescent, east towards India and west towards North Africa and Europe. Wherever they went, they transformed human societies.
Once the crops and animals of the Fertile Crescent reached Egypt, they caused an explosion of civilization. enough food to feed the pharaohs and generals, the engineers and scribes, and the armies of people required to build the pyramids.
So we're going to deal with Egypt. We're going to deal with some of these other countries. And I showed some of that again because I wasn't able to cue that up as efficiently as I would have liked, but I'm okay with that. But once domestication occurred here, and if these areas became abused environmentally, then they could move here, or they could move here, or they moved here into China, other places. And as long as they were on the same level, basically on longitude, they could bring their crops with them and they would work. They would have the same advantages wherever they went. And the reason why, and if you read his book, Guns, Germs, and Steel, or see the entire program that was put together by the National Geographic Society, they will show that when Europeans invaded South Africa, they found a place very similar, although on the opposite side of the globe, as it was back home. And the native population was wiped out by disease or whatever and conquered that, and it became a white majority area of Africa. But north of there, when they tried to move into the interior of Africa, geography worked against them. And it was never able to, they weren't able to bring their animals and crops and plants and way of life north into Africa. It was a very different situation that they did. And the same thing is basically true for the Amazon River Valley. It's not as accessible, but the middle of South America is in the same situation, never truly been conquered by the white settlers, the Europeans that came in for that same reason. Now, question? Now, some of the other things that will happen in the Middle East, not just farming, and that is important. That is being able to feed yourself creates society, because you got to have some people who are not burdened with the need to feed themselves, liberated from that in order to have a society with people who are specialists in anything you think is important. They also developed other kinds of technology and science. First of all is Hammurabi. He was the king of Babylon, that first unified Mesopotamia. He issued 300 laws, codes, that were designed to seek justice, prevail in the land, destroy the wicked, prevent the strong from oppressing the weak, and to further the welfare of people. And punishment traded in their severity on a social scale, so that those who were more socially significant sometimes had less penalties than those that were near the bottom. Now, if you study law, you will recognize that Hammurabi is seen as a very a pioneer in legal jurisprudence. But one of the things that he does not do, however, is publish the laws so that people would all know what they were. That won't come along until the Greeks and Romans decided to do that. It was sort of like if we just demerited you students every time you broke a rule without handing you a handbook, and hopefully eventually you might figure out what you're supposed to do and what not. And that's basically how this was. This stela is also a picture of Hammurabi receiving the code book from the gods. And so that also does give him a sense of advantage. Another is mathematics. Mathematics, they could solve linear and quadratic equations, discovered the Pythagoras theorems before Pythagoras thought of them. but we still call them that because we're Europeans. But they had already figured out how to do spatial and relative geometry. They began the whole concept of place value notation when doing math. And this is significant because we may not even think of how important this is. This is a math problem. 4 plus 4. Anyone know the answer? 10? Just depending. It could be 10. What would we might agree that this is? 8. But why do we know that it's 8 and not some other number? What if is it possible that one of those 4 is larger than the others and so the number might be bigger than 8? Or do we assume that every place value within the system is equal? We do assume that this 4 is the same size as this 4 because the component parts are all the same. But you don't ask that when you're doing math, do you? But could you imagine in a day when that had not yet been agreed to? Because you have this rock and this rock and this rock and this rock, and they're all different sizes, and you're supposed to be trying to do math. You have to agree that each notation in place is equal, or you can't do math. Not the way we think of math. I mean, you could probably come up with a formula, but this is a significant innovation. They also represented 0 with the character for not, because this was not something, the idea that you could represent 0. There's a book in the library called about the history of math and the philosophy of math. It's called, Here's Looking at You, Euclid. Euclid is an ancient mathematician in Greece. And in that particular book, they have a chapter 0, which deals with the world before numbers. Because in many societies, numbers are not necessary, primitive societies. I mean, you don't have to do inventory. In some societies, why would you need words for numbers? I mean, if people said, like, how many acorns do you have? A handful. That's good enough. It doesn't matter how many there are. It doesn't matter how many there are in their hand. You might have a word for 1. You might have a word for 2, maybe 3-ish. You don't even need numbers to tell time. You would say, I will be home when the shadow on that tree is on this rock. You know when that is because every day, at some point, the shadow on that tree is going to be on that rock. And that tells time. You don't need to know what time it is using some sort of number. Society can work perfectly well that way. And why would you need a number for 0 if you only have to deal with what you got? You don't have to have a number that represents 0. So it takes an advanced society to figure out you got to have a number or a way of saying nothing. And say something when you're saying nothing. When you represent nothing, you need a word for that, because usually you only need words for the absence of nothing until you realize you need, how many acorns do you have? I don't have any. And you don't know what to say because you don't have any word for 0. That creates a sense of advancement in their society. For science, the sun, moon, and the 5 visible planets of what we call today Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, which you can see with the naked eye if you know where to look. They were thought to be gods and gave birth to primitive, what we would think of as astrology, looking for the planets and the sun and the moon and various stars and coming up with religious connotations to them that would today, I don't know how popular it is, people looking for the horoscope to figure out how they're, they might as well just go and get a fortune cookie and open it. And in fact, then you can eat that too. But nonetheless, astrology was a way of having a religion of the sky. And then other religious ideas. We have they have a religion, but it was just a religion for this world, it appears. No immortality, no rewards for this life, no ethical content to the religion, no right or wrong, no salvation or penalty. It was just a system of omens that could be used to forecast the future using dreams or movements of birds and animals. You know, the birds are flying in a circle overhead. And you say to yourself, that's a bad sign, especially if they're going counterclockwise. Something is wrong. Birds only go clockwise around, and this time the birds are going in the opposite direction. That is a bad sign. So they were constantly, and this would translate into a lot of the Middle Eastern religions, they were constantly wanting to come up with omens and talking to spiritual people to interpret dreams, to find the future. Oil on water and interpreting that, casting of lots, astrological phenomena. And then some of the greatest stories of the ancient world will develop out of this culture. And one of them would be the Babylonian creation epic, Umm Elish. And then also this story here, the Epic of Gilgamesh. If you go up to the Ark Encounter, they'll talk about this. This was definitely a Noah-esque ark-type structure. It's a Sumerian story, and it appears as though almost every culture in the world has some kind of flood story that is embedded into their culture. That there are people who have rescued animals in some kind of structure and sailed around with them and their family. The Gilgamesh epic is the most like the story of the Bible, of any of them. There are some interesting contradictions that seem to indicate that it's not, it clearly is based on that, but it's been distorted. And if you look at if you go to the Ark Encounter, they have an exhibit where they talk about a lot of these other cultural stories and examine how the structures that they claim saved the animals and people and so forth, how they would have fared actually sailing about on the ocean. And in most cases, they wouldn't have gotten very far. But the Ark is perfectly designed to withstand torrential seas. The thing about the Gilgamesh epic is its problem is that they see him in a perfect cube, 7 stories tall, wide, and although it would have floated, it would have probably also been as stable as sort of like a bowling ball or basketball out on the ocean and flipping around upside down half the time, and most likely would not have survived the trip in being inside. The Ark certainly would have, you would have known that it was there, and the potential of capsizing, I'm sure, is always present, but like a major ocean liner as it's designed today that are safe in sea, it certainly would have been. Now, the emergence of Egyptian civilization. Now, Egypt will begin here in the, along the Nile River. Once the animals and plants were transported down into this area, very fertile soil, and because of the Nile River and the flooding, you would see a significant increase in productivity. Farming communities appear on the Western Delta. It is thought around 4800 BC. Two kingdoms, the Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt. Now, just so that we're aware, Upper Egypt is further south than Lower Egypt. Lower Egypt is up here. Upper Egypt, Lower Egypt. Does anyone know why that is?
The river flows,
Right. What is significant about the Nile River?
flows up instead of down.
Yeah, right. It's one of the very few rivers in the world that flows north. And so going upriver, you're going south. Now it does flow downhill because of the curvature of the earth, but it is flowing north. When the Yukon River up in Alaska is another one, but there are very few rivers that significantly flow north. But it flows north, so Upper Egypt is further south than Lower Egypt. Lower Egypt is up here in the top. So those are these two civilizations that will develop in Egypt. Another kingdom is called Narmer, and it united Upper and Lower Egypt in order to form the first dynasty. Here is, this is a picture of Narmer, the early Egyptian ruler, and he is going to bring the Upper and Lower Egypt together. As a result of this, the two crowns, if you want to call it that, of the Egyptian two kingdoms are combined. One kingdom had a I'm not necessarily going to draw something that looked something like a bowling pin, and the other one was something that more looked like a chair. And when they combined their kingdoms, they created a crown and headdress that appeared to be somewhat of a combination of the two. And we today think of the famous royal attire, beard, and such like this. This is a picture of the head medallion that was placed over the body of Tutankhamun, who was somewhat of a minor pharaoh in the grand scheme of things. But his kingdom, or his area, was discovered somewhere around 1920, early 20s. And his paltry little collection of artifacts fills nearly the entire museum in Cairo, antiquities. Couldn't imagine if we would have actually found one of the significant pharaoh's chambers before it was looted, which, unless we find something more recently undiscovered, they all were looted besides this one. Now, Pharaoh is the royal title of the king of Egypt. When he became the leader, the nobility lost their independence to his central authority. He became considered a god and the people's representative before God. Controlled huge tracts of land and received surplus crops from the royal estates. And some believe that we can see in the scripture when Joseph is the prime minister, the system outlined there explains how Egypt's Pharaoh gets control of the land and all of the people. During the time of famine, he had collected, or the plenty, he collected grain, then he sold it to them, and he took all their money, and then they were still in need of food. Then he takes themselves and their land, and Pharaoh will take control of the country by controlling their access to food during that time. Responsible for maintaining a balance of power between this world and the next, called Mot, which becomes a significant force. This is why they needed to be mummified. A king, and in Egyptian society, everyone believed in an afterlife, but guess what? In the next life, you were just like you were here. There was no upward mobility. So kings would still be kings, and commoners would still be commoners. Now, it doesn't explain what happens when there's more than one king, because every king continues to live on in the next world as a king. But the Ka, which would be sort of the spirit entity of you in the next world, had to come back and be able to recognize your body. This is why they developed mummification processes, and to keep the bodies intact and recognizable to the Ka. And we don't necessarily use the phrase spirit or soul. It's not that exactly. It's more like immaterial double. And they will set up a system where they have a Ka statue that represents the Ka, the double, coming to visit its body. And they would have curates. You know, when you go to a museum, it's run by curators. They're the keepers of the gods. Curators run a museum, a building dedicated to the muses, the gods of history. So we'll move on from there. But anyway, the curates would dress the Ka statue, change its clothes, give it baths, bring food and offer it before it. And they would believe that because it would need to have it would be sustained in death, just like it was in life. And they believed that the eyes of the statue took from the food whatever it was that gave you energy when you were eating it, so that after the day, there's no point in anyone else eating it, because the life force within the food was extracted by the Ka statue to keep the dead pharaoh alive in the next world.
Yeah.
And you can imagine the crisis that would occur if a mummy was destroyed, because then there would be a disruption in Mot. Everyone thought that doing this helped keep things stable in this world. That's what kept everyone happy. So when we come back, we'll continue on with this and look at some more aspects of Egyptian civilization. Get your persons to me if you haven't, and I will make up those schedules in the next few days.